"She's my responsibility now," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible as he stood beside the hospital bed, watching the machines breathe for the woman everyone else had given up on. He didn't know that claiming responsibility for Victoria Ashford, the billionaire CEO whose own son had left her to die, would cost him everything he'd worked for and give him everything he'd been searching for. Earlier that evening, Daniel Chen had been finishing his shift in the ICU, exhausted from another 12-hour rotation. Just another night nurse doing what night nurses do, keeping vigil over the forgotten, the dying, the alone. But then he'd overheard the argument. Dr. Marcus Ashford, the hospital's youngest and most celebrated cardiothoracic surgeon, standing in his own mother's room, saying words that made Daniel's blood run cold. "I'm not wasting my career on a lost cause. Let nature take its course." Victoria Ashford had collapsed during a board meeting. Massive stroke. The prognosis was grim but not hopeless. With aggressive treatment, she had a chance. But Marcus had already made his decision. He'd signed a DNR without her consent, instructed the staff to provide comfort care only, and walked out. Just walked out. Left his mother to die so he could inherit her empire a few months early, so he could finally step out of her shadow. Before we dive into this story of courage, chosen family, and standing up for those who cannot stand for themselves, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe that true responsibility isn't about blood or obligation, but about choosing to care when no one else will, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories about silent heroes like Daniel deserve to be told, and you won't want to miss them. Now, what do you think gave Daniel, a man who had already lost so much, the strength to risk everything for a stranger? And when Daniel found Victoria there, alone in the dim room, her fingers twitching slightly as if reaching for something, for someone, he made a choice that would change 2 lives forever. He picked up the phone. He called the ethics board. He said 5 words that would cost him his job and his reputation. "She's my responsibility now." The fluorescent lights of St. Michael's Hospital hummed their eternal song, that low buzz that became white noise after your first month on the job. Daniel had been here 8 years. He didn't hear it anymore. What he did hear was the steady beep of Victoria Ashford's heart monitor, slower than it should be, weaker than it should be. He stood in the doorway of room 407, clipboard in hand, watching her. She looked smaller than he'd imagined a billionaire would look. Fragile. Her salt and pepper hair spread across the pillow like silk, and even unconscious, even with half her face slack from the stroke, there was something regal about her, something that refused to be diminished. The DNR order sat clipped to the front of her chart. "Do not resuscitate," signed by her son. Her doctor's son. Daniel's fingers tightened around the clipboard until his knuckles went white. He'd seen Marcus Ashford around the hospital for years. Everyone had. The golden boy of cardiothoracic surgery, 32 years old and already being courted by hospitals in 3 different countries. Handsome in that sharp, calculated way. Always impeccably dressed. Always surrounded by residents who hung on his every word like he was handing down commandments from on high. Daniel had never liked him. There was something cold in Marcus Ashford's eyes. Something that reminded Daniel of the administrators who'd tried to rush his wife Sarah through treatment, who'd talked about quality of life and realistic expectations, when what they really meant was expensive and not worth the investment. Sarah had died anyway, but at least she'd died fighting. At least she'd died knowing that someone had fought for her. Daniel stepped into the room. Victoria's fingers twitched again, that same small movement he'd noticed from the hallway. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Somewhere deep inside that damaged brain, something was still fighting. Someone was still there. He moved to her bedside and gently took her hand. It was cool to the touch. Soft. The hands of someone who'd never done manual labor, who'd spent her life signing documents and shaking hands and building empires. But there was strength there too. He could feel it in the way her fingers instinctively curled around his. Weak, but present. "Mrs. Ashford," he whispered, even though he knew she probably couldn't hear him. "I'm Daniel. I'm your nurse tonight." No response. Just the steady beep of the monitor and the soft hiss of oxygen through the nasal cannula. He looked down at the DNR order again. It wasn't right. The stroke had been severe, yes. The left side of her brain had hemorrhaged badly, but she was only 58. She was strong. The scans showed swelling, yes, but no catastrophic damage. With aggressive treatment, surgery to relieve the pressure, intensive rehab, she had a real chance. Not a guarantee. Medicine never offered guarantees, but a chance. And Marcus Ashford had taken that chance away from her before she'd even had the opportunity to fight for it. Daniel knew why. Everyone on staff knew why, even if they didn't say it out loud. Victoria Ashford was worth an estimated $3 billion. Her pharmaceutical company, Ashford Biotech, was one of the largest in the country, and Marcus was her only heir. Do the math. A prolonged recovery meant prolonged uncertainty, meant Victoria might survive but never fully recover, might need care, might hold on to control of her company for years while Marcus waited in the wings, aging out of his prime, watching opportunities pass him by. But if she died now, cleanly, quietly, with everyone nodding sympathetically about the tragedy of it all, then Marcus got everything. And all he had to do was nothing. Daniel's stomach turned. He'd been a nurse long enough to know that death was sometimes a mercy. He'd held enough hands, whispered enough prayers, helped enough people let go when letting go was the kindest thing left. But this wasn't that. This was murder dressed up in medical terminology. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. He noticed that with a strange detachment, like he was watching someone else's hands shake, someone else about to do something monumentally stupid. He pulled up the number for the hospital's ethics board. They'd be closed at this hour. He'd get a voicemail, but it would be time-stamped. It would be official. It would start a process that couldn't be stopped, and it would end his career. Marcus Ashford had friends in high places, on the hospital board, in the medical community, everywhere that mattered. Daniel was nobody, just a night nurse, replaceable, invisible. He looked down at Victoria again. Her eyes were moving beneath her closed lids now. Rapid eye movement, dreaming maybe, or fighting her way back to consciousness through damaged neural pathways and swollen tissue, fighting to live. And her own son had decided she shouldn't get that chance. Daniel pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before the voicemail picked up. You've reached the St. Michael's Hospital Ethics Board. Our office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. If this is an urgent matter requiring immediate ethics consultation, please press 1 to be connected to the on-call ethics officer. Daniel pressed 1. Another ring. Then a tired voice, male, slightly irritated. This is Dr. Raymond Foster. You've reached the ethics hotline. What's the nature of your concern? Daniel took a breath. This was it. The moment. Once he said the words, there was no taking them back. My name is Daniel Chen. I'm a registered nurse in the ICU at St. Michael's. I need to report a DNR order that I believe was signed without proper consent and may constitute medical negligence or worse. Silence on the other end. Then, go on. The patient is Victoria Ashford. She suffered a massive stroke approximately 6 hours ago. She's currently semi-conscious, showing signs of awareness. Her son, Dr. Marcus Ashford, is listed as her healthcare proxy, and he signed a DNR order and ordered comfort care only. And you believe this order is inappropriate? I believe it's premature at best and criminal at worst. The patient has not been given adequate time to stabilize. No neurological consult has been completed. No family meeting has been held. And I have reason to believe that Dr. Ashford's decision is motivated by financial gain rather than the patient's best interest. Another pause. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Chen. I know. Do you understand that making a formal complaint will trigger an investigation? That you'll be required to testify? That if your allegations are found to be baseless, you could face disciplinary action. I understand. And you're prepared to move forward anyway? Daniel looked down at Victoria. Her fingers were still curled around his hand. Yes, he said quietly. She's my responsibility now. He didn't know where those words came from. They just appeared, fully formed, true in a way that bypassed logic and went straight to something deeper. All right, Dr. Foster said. I'm filing an emergency ethics consultation. The DNR order is suspended pending review. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't leave the patient's room and don't let anyone alter her chart or change her treatment plan. Understood? Understood. And Mr. Chen? I hope for your sake that you're right about this. The line went dead. Daniel set his phone down on the bedside table and sank into the chair beside Victoria's bed. His whole body was trembling now, adrenaline and terror and something else. Something that felt almost like hope. "I've got you," he whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "I've got you now. You're not alone." Victoria's eyelids fluttered, and then, so softly he almost missed it, so quietly it might have been his imagination, he heard her whisper back, "Thank you." Her eyes didn't open, her grip didn't tighten, but he'd heard it. She was still there, still fighting, and now, so was he. The investigation moved quickly. Too quickly for Marcus Ashford's liking and exactly fast enough for Daniel's mounting sense of dread. Dr. Foster arrived within the promised 20 minutes. A silver-haired man in his 60s with kind eyes, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent 40 years navigating hospital politics. He reviewed Victoria's chart, examined her briefly, and made 3 phone calls that set the entire administrative wing of St. Michael's buzzing like a kicked hornet's nest. By morning, Marcus had been temporarily removed from his mother's case pending the ethics review. By noon, Daniel had been placed on paid administrative leave. Not fired, not yet, but suspended, pending investigation into whether he'd overstepped his scope of practice, whether he'd acted appropriately, whether he'd let personal feelings cloud his professional judgment. Daniel didn't care. Victoria was alive. The DNR had been rescinded. She'd been moved to the neurological ICU where a team of specialists, none of whom were her son, had begun aggressive treatment to reduce the brain swelling and give her body time to heal. That was all that mattered. He told himself that anyway, as he sat in his tiny apartment that first night, staring at the stack of bills on his kitchen table. Medical bills mostly, Sarah's medical bills. They'd been in collections for 2 years now, a constant weight he carried like stones in his pockets. He couldn't afford to lose this job, but he also couldn't afford to look Victoria Ashford in the eye, if she ever woke up, and tell her he'd let her die because it was safer. The next morning, he went back to the hospital anyway. Not to work. He wasn't allowed to work. But there was no rule that said he couldn't visit. So he did. He walked past the security desk with his visitor's badge, took the elevator to the neuro ICU, and knocked softly on the door of Victoria's new room. A nurse he didn't recognize looked up from adjusting an IV line. "Can I help you?" "I'm Daniel Chen. I was Mrs. Ashford's nurse when she was admitted. I just wanted to check on her if that's all right." The nurse's expression shifted, something between respect and wariness crossing her features. "You're the one who filed the complaint." It wasn't a question. "Yes." She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the bed. "She's doing better. Brain swelling is down. She's been semi-conscious a few times. Responsive to voice and touch." A pause. "You probably saved her life." Daniel's throat tightened. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," the nurse said quietly. "You did what anyone should do. Big difference." She left him alone with Victoria. The room was quieter than the regular ICU. Softer lighting. Fewer machines, though the ones that remained beeped and hummed their vigilant watch. Victoria looked better than she had that first night. Color had returned to her cheeks. Her breathing was stronger. Daniel pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Hi, Mrs. Ashford," he said softly. "It's Daniel. I don't know if you remember me. I was your nurse the night you came in." No response, but her eyelids flickered slightly, like she was trying to surface from deep water. "I just wanted to check on you. Make sure you're okay." He paused, suddenly uncertain what to say. "I know things are complicated right now. With your son, with everything. But I want you to know that you're safe. People are fighting for you." Her fingers twitched. Daniel reached out and took her hand, the same way he had that first night. And this time, slowly, deliberately, her fingers curled around his and squeezed. It wasn't much, barely any pressure at all, but it was intentional. It was communication. It was her way of saying thank you. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen since Sarah died, since he'd watched his wife slip away despite everything he'd tried to do, every prayer he'd whispered, every desperate bargain he'd offered to a God who hadn't seemed to be listening. "You're welcome," he whispered back. He visited every day after that, not long visits, 20 minutes, maybe 30. He'd sit beside her bed and talk. About nothing, really. About the weather. About the terrible coffee in the hospital cafeteria. About Sophie, his 5-year-old daughter who was staying with Mrs. Patterson next door, while Daniel figured out what came next. He told Victoria about Sarah, too. About how they'd met in nursing school. about how she'd been the one with the brilliant future, while he'd been content to be a floor nurse, about how the cancer had come fast and mean, about how he'd taken out loans he couldn't afford to pay for treatments that hadn't worked. "I think that's why I couldn't walk away from you," he admitted one afternoon, almost 2 weeks after that first night. "Because I know what it feels like to be helpless, to watch someone suffer and not be able to fix it, and I know what it feels like to have someone fight for you anyway." Victoria's eyes opened. Daniel nearly fell out of his chair. They were gray, her eyes, storm cloud gray, and they were looking right at him, focused and aware and full of something that might have been gratitude or might have been grief. "You," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "Me?" Daniel agreed, his heart hammering. "Hi, welcome back." A single tear slid down her cheek. "My son." "I know," Daniel said gently. "I'm sorry." She closed her eyes again, but her hand tightened around his. "Thank you." Over the next week, Victoria improved steadily. The paralysis on her left side began to recede. She started physical therapy, grueling sessions where she relearned how to grip a spoon, how to lift her arm, how to stand without immediately collapsing. Daniel watched from the hallway sometimes during visiting hours. He watched her grit her teeth through the pain, watched her refuse to cry even when the frustration was written plainly across her face, watched her build herself back up, cell by cell, muscle by muscle, one agonizing movement at a time. She was extraordinary. "You're staring." Daniel jumped. He hadn't realized Victoria was looking at him through the therapy room window. She was sitting in a wheelchair, exhausted from her session, hair damp with sweat, but she was smiling slightly. The left side of her face was still a little slack, but the smile was real. He walked into the room. "Caught me," he admitted. "How long have you been out there? 10 minutes, 15? Victoria shook her head slightly, that small smile still playing at her lips. "Don't you have somewhere better to be?" "Not particularly." She studied him for a long moment. "The investigation. How bad is it?" Daniel shrugged. "Don't know yet. They're still gathering statements. I've talked to the ethics board 3 times, hospital administration twice, a lawyer once." "A lawyer," Victoria repeated, her voice sharp despite its weakness. "Marcus is suing you." "Trying to." "Your son is very creative with legal threats. He's an entitled child who's never been told no," Victoria said, and the bitterness in her voice was startling. "I did that. I made him that way. You didn't make him abandon you, didn't I?" Victoria's good hand clenched into a fist on the wheelchair armrest. "I worked 70-hour weeks when he was growing up. I missed soccer games and science fairs and parent-teacher conferences. I built an empire and told myself I was doing it for him, for his future, but really I was doing it for me, for my ego, and I raised a man who thinks people are assets to be managed." "You also raised a man who became a surgeon," Daniel pointed out. "That's not nothing." "A surgeon who tried to kill his mother for inheritance money," Victoria shot back. "Forgive me if I don't put that on the Christmas card." Daniel couldn't help it. He laughed. Victoria stared at him for a second, then started laughing too. It hurt her. He could see the wince, but she laughed anyway. When they both caught their breath, Victoria looked at him seriously. "I want to pay for your legal defense, and compensate you for the suspension, and—" "No." "Mr. Chen." "Daniel." "And no. You're being stubborn. I'm being consistent. I didn't do this for money." "Then why did you do it?" Daniel met her eyes. "Because you deserved better than dying alone." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, softened. "Most people wouldn't have cared." "I'm not most people." "No," Victoria said quietly. "You're not." 3 weeks after Victoria's stroke, Daniel brought Sophie to visit. He hadn't planned to, but Mrs. Patterson had called that morning to say her sister was in the hospital. Nothing serious, just a routine surgery, and she needed to be out of town for a few days. Daniel had scrambled to find childcare, failed, and finally decided that bringing a 5-year-old to the hospital was better than leaving her home alone. Sophie held his hand tightly as they walked through the corridors, her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Is this where Mommy was?" she asked quietly. Daniel's heart clenched. "Different hospital, sweetheart, but similar. Is the lady we're visiting sick like Mommy was?" "She was, but she's getting better." Sophie considered this. "That's good. I'm glad she's getting better." They reached Victoria's room. She'd been moved to a regular floor 2 days ago, out of intensive care and into the rehabilitation wing. Daniel knocked softly. "Come in." Victoria was sitting in the chair by the window, dressed in real clothes for the first time since the stroke. Slacks and a soft sweater. Her hair was brushed and pulled back. She looked almost like herself again, though the wheelchair beside her was a stark reminder that the journey wasn't over. She looked up when they entered, and her eyes immediately found Sophie. "Oh," she said softly. "Mrs. Ashford. This is Sophie." "Sophie, this is Mrs. Ashford. Say hello." Sophie stepped forward, suddenly shy. "Hello, Mrs. Ashford. My daddy says you're getting better. I'm glad." Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind of you to say." Sophie tilted her head, studying Victoria with that unnerving directness that 5-year-olds possessed. "You look sad." "Sophie," Daniel started, but Victoria held up a hand. "It's all right." She looked at Sophie seriously. "I am a little sad, but I'm also happy. Both things at once. Does that make sense?" Sophie nodded sagely. "When Mommy became a star, I was sad and happy too. Sad because I miss her. Happy because she's not sick anymore." Victoria's breath caught. "Your mommy became a star? That's what Daddy says, that she's up in heaven being a star. So she can watch over us." Victoria looked up at Daniel, and the expression on her face was so raw, so full of grief and wonder, and something achingly close to hope, that Daniel had to look away. "That's beautiful," Victoria whispered. Sophie climbed onto the other chair, swinging her legs. "Do you have kids, Mrs. Ashford?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I have a son, but we're not talking right now." "Why not?" "Sophie," Daniel said gently. "It's okay," Victoria said. She looked at Sophie. "We had a disagreement. Sometimes that happens with families. Daddy says families should forgive each other. Your daddy is a wise man." Sophie beamed at that, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a piece of paper. "I drew you a picture. Daddy said you might like it." She held it out to Victoria. It was a crayon drawing, the kind that only made sense if you were 5 or if someone explained it to you. Stick figures and bright colors, and a big yellow sun in the corner. "This is you," Sophie said, pointing to a stick figure in a bed. "And this is my daddy. He's helping you feel better. And this is me. I'm giving you flowers." Victoria took the drawing with trembling hands. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you, Sophie. I'll treasure it." Sophie grinned, then slid off the chair. "Can I see outside?" "Of course," Victoria said. Sophie pressed her face to the window, and Daniel moved closer to Victoria. "Sorry," he murmured. "She asks a lot of questions." "Don't apologize. She's wonderful." Victoria looked down at the drawing, her thumb tracing the stick figures. "I don't remember the last time someone drew me a picture. She has that effect on people." "She looks like her mother?" "Yes. She's lucky to have you." Daniel swallowed hard. "I'm the lucky one." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Sophie point out birds and clouds through the window, her voice a soft melody of observations and wonder. "I don't know how to do this," Victoria said suddenly. Daniel looked at her. "Do what?" "This. Be human. Be just. A person, not a CEO, not a board chair, not Victoria Ashford with the corporate portfolio and the reputation and the empire." She laughed, but it was hollow. "I've spent 30 years building walls, and now they're all crumbling, and I don't know what's underneath. Maybe that's the point," Daniel said quietly. "Maybe you get to find out who you are when all the walls are gone." Victoria looked at him, really looked at him. "You lost your job because of me. I made a choice that hurt you, a choice I'd make again." "Why?" Daniel thought about that, about Sarah dying in a hospital bed, about Sophie, who'd lost her mother before she was old enough to really remember her, about himself, alone in the dark at 3 a.m, wondering if anything he did actually mattered. "Because someone has to care," he said finally. "Someone has to look at another person and decide they're worth the risk, worth the cost, worth fighting for even when it's stupid and dangerous and probably going to blow up in your face. That's a terrible philosophy." "Yeah," Daniel agreed, "but it's mine." Victoria reached out and took his hand. Her grip was stronger than it had been. Not back to full strength, but getting there. Healing. "Thank you," she said, "for caring, for fighting, for being monumentally stupid on my behalf." Daniel smiled. Any time. Sophie turned from the window. Daddy, I'm hungry. Of course you are, Daniel said, standing. We should go, let Mrs. Ashford rest. Actually, Victoria said quickly, would you stay? For dinner? The hospital food is terrible, but there's a cafeteria. We could… She stopped, suddenly uncertain. Unless you have somewhere to be. Daniel looked at her, at this brilliant, broken woman who was learning how to be human again, who was reaching out tentatively for connection. We'd love to, he said. Victoria's smile was radiant. They had dinner in the cafeteria. Terrible hospital food that Sophie complained about, and Victoria laughed at, and Daniel pretended was gourmet cuisine. They talked about nothing important, about Sophie's kindergarten class, about Victoria's physical therapy progress, about the weather and the terrible coffee, and the way the Jell-O always seemed to be exactly the same temperature as room air. It was ordinary. It was perfect. And when they finally said goodbye that night, when Sophie hugged Victoria's legs and Daniel squeezed her shoulder, when they walked out into the cool evening air, Daniel realized something. He hadn't felt this light in 3 years, not since Sarah died. Maybe Victoria wasn't the only one learning how to be human again. Maybe they were healing each other. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday. Daniel was at the park with Sophie, pushing her on the swings, when a man in a suit approached with an envelope. Daniel Chen? Yes? You've been served. The man handed him the envelope and walked away before Daniel could respond. Sophie called from the swing. Higher, Daddy. Push me higher. Daniel pushed her absently, his eyes on the envelope in his hand. Official letterhead. Law offices he'd never heard of, but that sounded expensive. The kind of lawyers who billed by the minute and never lost. He waited until Sophie was distracted by a butterfly to open it. Marcus Ashford was suing him for medical malpractice, defamation, interference with familial relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The dollar amount made Daniel's vision blur. $2 million. He didn't have $200. His phone rang. Hospital administration. Mr. Chen, we need you to come in for a meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. What's this about? A pause. It's regarding your employment status. Please bring any documentation related to the Ashford case. The line went dead. Daniel sat on the bench and watched Sophie play, his hands shaking so badly he had to grip his knees to keep them still. He'd known this was coming. Had known from that first phone call to the ethics board that there would be consequences. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it crash down on you in real time were very different things. He was going to lose everything. The meeting the next morning was worse than he'd imagined. 3 hospital administrators sat across the table from him, their expressions carefully neutral. A lawyer from the hospital's legal team sat at the end, reviewing documents. Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. We'll make this brief. The chief administrator, a thin woman named Dr. Hartley, folded her hands on the table. As you know, there's been an ongoing investigation into the events surrounding Victoria Ashford's admission and treatment. Yes, the ethics board has completed their review. They found that while your concerns about the DNR order were valid, your method of escalating those concerns bypassed proper channels. You should have gone through your charge nurse, then the attending physician, then, if necessary, the ethics board. There wasn't time for proper channels, Daniel said quietly. Mrs. Ashford needed immediate intervention. That's not your determination to make. You're a nurse, not a physician. I'm also a human being who watched another human being's son try to kill her. Doctor, Hartley's expression hardened. Dr. Ashford's medical decisions were within his rights as healthcare proxy. His medical decisions were criminal. That's for the courts to decide. What we're here to discuss is your employment. She slid a paper across the table. Effective immediately, your employment with St. Michael's Hospital is terminated. For cause, you'll receive 2 weeks severance pay and your accrued vacation time. Your benefits end at the end of the month. Daniel stared at the termination letter. He'd expected it, but seeing it in writing, feeling the weight of it settle over him like a shroud. Dr. Ashford is on the board of directors, Daniel said slowly. This is retaliation. This is consequences, Dr. Hartley corrected. You acted outside your scope of practice and made serious allegations against a respected physician. Whether those allegations are true or not is irrelevant to your professional conduct. A woman would have died. That's speculation. It's fact. Daniel stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor, And everyone in this room knows it. But she's alive and he's rich and connected, so I'm the one getting fired. That about sum it up? No one answered. Daniel picked up the termination letter and walked out. He made it to his car before the panic set in. No job meant no income. No income meant no apartment, no way to pay the medical bills, no way to support Sophie. He had maybe 3 months of savings if he was lucky. After that, his phone rang. Victoria. He almost didn't answer. Almost couldn't bear to tell her that his grand gesture had cost him everything. But he picked up anyway. Daniel, are you okay? I just heard, I'm fine. You're not fine. They fired you. News travels fast. I'm on the hospital foundation board. I still have friends there. A pause. I'm so sorry, this is my fault. It's not your fault, it's Marcus's fault. Please let me help. I can pay for a lawyer. I can talk to the board. I can... No. Daniel. I said no, Victoria. I appreciate it, but I don't need your money. I don't need to be saved. He heard her sharp intake of breath. Then what do you need? I need... His voice cracked. I need to figure out how to tell my 5-year-old daughter that we're probably going to lose our apartment. Silence on the other end. Then quietly, come stay with me. What? I'm being discharged next week. I'm renting a smaller place while I recover, nothing like the mansion. 2 bedrooms. You and Sophie can stay until you get back on your feet. Victoria, don't say no. Please, let me do this. You saved my life. Let me help save yours. Daniel closed his eyes. Pride said no. Pride said he'd figure it out on his own like he always had. But Sophie needed stability. Sophie needed a roof over her head and food on the table, and a father who wasn't breaking apart at the seams. Okay, he whispered. Okay, thank you. The court hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Marcus's lawyers had filed for an emergency restraining order, claiming Daniel posed a threat to their client and to Victoria. It was absurd, transparent, designed to intimidate. It was also working. Daniel sat in the courtroom in his only suit, feeling like an imposter. Marcus sat across the aisle with 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits, looking calm and confident and utterly convinced of his victory. Victoria sat behind Daniel. She'd insisted on coming despite still being weak, despite the wheelchair, despite everything. She'd dressed in a sharp blazer and slacks, her hair pulled back, looking every inch the CEO she'd been before the stroke. When the judge entered, everyone stood. This is a hearing regarding case number 2024 CV 8847, Marcus Ashford versus Daniel Chen. We're here to determine if there's sufficient cause for a temporary restraining order. The judge, an older black woman with sharp eyes, looked over her glasses at Marcus's lead attorney. Counselor, make your case. The lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client is a respected physician who made a difficult but medically sound decision regarding his mother's end-of-life care. Mr. Chen, a nurse with no authority over patient care decisions, took it upon himself to override that decision, file spurious ethics complaints, and insert himself into a private family matter. Since then, he's continued to contact Mrs. Victoria Ashford despite being terminated from the hospital, demonstrating a pattern of obsessive behavior that constitutes harassment and stalking. Daniel's stomach turned. Mr. Chen has visited my client's mother over 30 times in the past month. He's brought his young daughter to these visits, creating an inappropriate emotional bond designed to manipulate a vulnerable woman. He's attempted to isolate Mrs. Ashford from her family and convince her that her own son tried to murder her. That's because he did, Victoria said loudly from behind Daniel. The judge's gaze shifted to her. Ma'am, please don't speak out of turn. I'm Victoria Ashford. This hearing is about me. Don't I get to speak? This is about a restraining order against Mr. Chen, not about the validity of the DNR order. They're the same thing, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. My son tried to let me die so he could inherit my money. Daniel Chen stopped him. And now Marcus is trying to destroy Daniel's life to punish him for saving mine. The judge studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Ashford, do you feel threatened by Mr. Chen? No. Do you feel he's harassed you or made you uncomfortable in any way? No. He's been nothing but kind and respectful. Have you invited him to visit you? Yes, multiple times. He and his daughter are staying with me while he looks for new employment. Marcus shot to his feet. She's not in her right mind. The stroke affected her judgment. Sit down, doctor. Ashford, the judge said sharply. You'll get your turn. Marcus sat, jaw clenched. The judge looked at Victoria again. Mrs. Ashford, I understand you've completed a full neurological evaluation. Yes, Your Honor. Clear cognitive function. No impairment to decision-making capacity. I have the documentation if you'd like to see it. I would. Victoria's lawyer, she'd hired one, Daniel realized without telling him, stood and approached the bench with a folder full of medical records. The judge reviewed them in silence. Then she looked at Marcus. Dr. Ashford, do you have medical evidence that your mother is mentally incapacitated? The stroke was severe. Even if she's cognitively intact now, she may be experiencing emotional instability that makes her vulnerable to manipulation. So your answer is no. You don't have evidence. Marcus's jaw worked. I'm concerned for her welfare. Funny, Victoria said coldly. You weren't concerned for my welfare when you signed a DNR without my consent. You were dying. I was fighting. You would have wanted to die with dignity. Don't you dare tell me what I would have wanted. Victoria's voice shook with rage. You made that decision for yourself, for your inheritance, for your freedom from the mother who expected too much. The courtroom went silent. Marcus stared at his mother, and for the first time Daniel saw real emotion cross his face. Pain, anger, grief. You were never satisfied, Marcus said quietly. Nothing I did was ever enough. Every achievement you wanted more. Every success you reminded me how much further I could go. You built an empire and forgot you had a son. So you decided to let me die for it? Victoria's voice cracked. That was your solution? To inherit the company and be done with me? I wanted to be free of you. The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's face crumpled, just for a second. Then she straightened, steel sliding back into place. Well, now you are. She looked at the judge. I want a restraining order against my son. I don't want him near me, near Daniel, or near Daniel's daughter. He's a danger to all of us. Mom, Marcus started. Don't call me that. You lost that right when you decided I was worth more dead than alive. The judge cleared her throat. I'm denying the petition for a restraining order against Mr. Chen. Mrs. Ashford has made it clear she welcomes his presence and considers him a friend. However, she looked at Marcus. I'm granting Mrs. Ashford's request for a protective order against you, Dr. Ashford. You're to stay at least 100 yards away from your mother, from Mr. Chen, and from Mr. Chen's residence until further notice. Do you understand? Marcus stood slowly, his face ashen. Yes, Your Honor. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. Daniel turned to look at Victoria. She was gripping the arms of her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face, but her expression fierce, unbroken. He reached for her hand. She took it. Thank you, she whispered. You stood up to him, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. You were so brave. I learned from the best. They sat there in the emptying courtroom, holding hands while Marcus and his lawyers filed out in defeat. That night, back at Victoria's apartment, Sophie couldn't sleep. She'd been upset all evening, clinging to Daniel, asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Is the mean doctor going to hurt Miss Victoria? No, sweetheart. The judge said he has to stay away. But what if he doesn't listen? Then we'll keep her safe, I promise. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then crawled out of bed. I need to make something. She got out her crayons and paper and worked in fierce concentration for 20 minutes, while Daniel watched from the doorway. When she finished, she held up the drawing. It was another stick figure family. Daniel, Victoria, and Sophie. But this time they were holding hands in a circle, and written across the top in Sophie's careful letters, Please wake up. We need you. Daniel's breath caught. Sweetie, Miss Victoria is awake. I know, Sophie said seriously, but I want her to wake up all the way. I want her to stay. She walked to Victoria's room and knocked softly. Come in, Victoria called. Sophie went in alone. Daniel watched from the hallway as she climbed onto Victoria's bed and handed her the drawing. Victoria looked at it for a long time. Then she pulled Sophie into her arms and held her, crying silently into her hair. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. I promise, I'm not going anywhere. ATO-4, a resolution target, 2, 500 palavras. Entregue, 2, 618 palavras. 3 days after the hearing, Victoria collapsed again. It happened in the kitchen. She'd been making coffee, insisting she could do it herself, rejecting Daniel's offers to help. when her left leg gave out and she went down hard, hitting her head on the counter on the way. Daniel heard the crash from the living room where he'd been helping Sophie with a puzzle. He ran. Victoria was on the floor, conscious but dazed, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow. "Don't move," Daniel said, dropping to his knees beside her. "Sophie, bring me the first aid kit from the bathroom now." Sophie ran. Victoria tried to sit up. "I'm fine, I just lost my balance." "You're not fine. Stay still." He checked her pupils. Even. Responsive. Good. He felt along her scalp for other injuries, checked her neck, her spine. Sophie returned with the kit and Daniel cleaned and bandaged the cut, while Victoria sat very still, her jaw clenched. "I'm calling 911, Daniel said. "No. Victoria. No hospitals. Please. I just got out. I can't go back. You hit your head hard. You could have a concussion. You could be having a secondary stroke." "I'm not." She grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "It was just the stress, the hearing, Marcus, all of it. My body is still healing and I pushed too hard, that's all." Daniel looked at her. Really looked. At the exhaustion carved into her face, the tremor in her hands, the way she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "Okay," he said quietly, "but you're going to rest. Actually rest. No arguments. I don't take orders well. Start learning." Victoria laughed despite herself, then winced and touched her bandaged forehead. "You're bossy for a nurse. You're stubborn for a patient." Sophie appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Is Miss Victoria dying?" "No, sweetheart," Victoria said immediately. "I'm okay. I just fell, but I'm okay." Sophie didn't look convinced. Victoria held out her arms. "Come here." Sophie ran to her and Victoria pulled her close, ignoring the obvious pain the movement caused. "I'm not going anywhere," Victoria whispered into Sophie's hair. "I promise. You're stuck with me." "Good," Sophie said fiercely, "because I need you." Over Victoria's shoulder, Daniel saw tears spill down her cheeks. The investigation into Marcus moved quickly after the hearing. Victoria's lawyer had filed a formal complaint with the medical board, providing evidence that Marcus had falsified the DNR, had access to Victoria's financial records before her collapse, and had made several attempts to liquidate company assets without board approval. The board suspended his medical license pending a full investigation. 2 weeks later, they revoked it permanently. Marcus Ashford was no longer a doctor. The hospital quietly settled with Daniel, offering his job back with back pay and a formal apology. They also offered a substantial settlement in exchange for him not pursuing legal action. Daniel took the job back. He turned down the settlement. "You should take the money," Victoria said when he told her. They were sitting on her small balcony, watching the sunset paint the city gold. "God knows you've earned it. I don't want their money. I want to go back to work and do my job." "Stubborn," says the woman who tried to make coffee 3 days after giving herself a concussion. Victoria smiled. Fair point. They sat in comfortable silence. Sophie was inside watching cartoons, her laughter drifting through the open door. "I'm scared," Victoria said suddenly. Daniel looked at her. "Of what?" "Of this. Of being happy. Of depending on people." She laughed, but it was hollow. "I've spent my entire adult life being self-sufficient, being the one people depended on, and now I can barely walk across a room without help. I can't drive. I can't work. I can't." Her voice broke. Daniel reached over and took her hand. "You're healing. That takes time. What if I never get back to who I was? Then you become someone new." Victoria looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What if I don't know how? Then we'll figure it out together." "Why?" Victoria whispered. "Why are you still here? You have your job back. You don't owe me anything. You could leave and—" "I don't want to leave." The words hung in the air between them. Victoria stared at him. "Daniel, I know it's complicated," he said quickly. "I know you're still recovering, and I'm technically your caregiver, and there are about 17 different reasons why this is probably inappropriate. But I'm tired of pretending I'm just here out of obligation or friendship or whatever we're supposed to call it." "Then what are you here for?" Daniel took a breath. "You. I'm here for you. Because somewhere between that first night and now, you became important to me. You and Sophie," his voice caught. "Your family. The family I chose, the family I want." Victoria's tears spilled over. "I'm 22 years older than you. I don't care. I'm broken. You're healing. So am I. I don't know how to be anything except a CEO. Then learn. We'll learn together. Victoria laughed through her tears. This is insane. Yeah, Daniel agreed. It really is. I haven't been on a date in 15 years. Lucky for you, I'm an excellent first date. This is our first date? Daniel looked around at the small balcony, at the leftover takeout containers on the table, at Sophie visible through the door in her unicorn pajamas. If you want it to be. Victoria reached up and touched his face, her fingers trembling. I want it to be. Daniel leaned forward and kissed her. It was soft, careful, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling. That was nice. Yeah? Yeah. She paused. Although for the record, I think Sophie counts as a chaperone, which makes this both our first date and the world's strangest family dinner. Daniel laughed. She's going to have opinions about this. Oh God, she's 5. She's going to have so many opinions. As if on cue, Sophie appeared in the doorway. Daddy, can Miss Victoria read me a story? Daniel looked at Victoria. You up for it? Always. They went inside together. Victoria settled on the couch with Sophie curled against her side, a picture book open on their laps. Daniel sat in the chair across from them, watching. This was what he'd been missing. Not romance, necessarily. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations. Just this. Quiet moments. Chosen family. Home. Victoria looked up from the book and met his eyes. And he saw the same realization reflected back at him. They'd both been lost. Both broken. Both convinced they'd never find their way back to something that felt like living. But somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other. And that was enough. 2 months later, Victoria returned to work. Not full-time. Not yet. But she went back to the office 3 days a week, attending board meetings, reviewing reports, slowly reclaiming her role. She was different now. Softer. More present. She asked about people's families. She took lunch breaks. She left at 5. The board noticed. Some approved. Some worried she'd lost her edge. Victoria didn't care. She'd spent 30 years building an empire. She could spend the rest of her life building a life. Daniel had returned to the ICU, but his role had changed. The hospital had created a new position, patient advocate coordinator, and offered it to him. He'd work with ethics boards, review questionable treatment decisions, give voice to patients who couldn't speak for themselves. It was everything he'd fought for without knowing he was fighting for it. Sophie started kindergarten that fall. Victoria picked her up from school on the days she wasn't working, took her for ice cream, helped with homework at the kitchen table in the small apartment they still shared. When are you moving back to your mansion? Sophie asked one afternoon, coloring a worksheet with fierce concentration. Victoria paused in the middle of chopping vegetables. I don't think I am, sweetheart. Sophie looked up. Why not? Because I like it here better. With me and Daddy? With you and Daddy. Sophie considered this, then went back to coloring. Good. I like you here better too. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Victoria and Daniel sat on the balcony again. It had become their ritual. Coffee in the morning, wine in the evening. This small space where they could breathe. I've been thinking, Victoria said. Dangerous. She smiled. About the future, about what comes next. And I want to scale back at the company. Step down as CEO. Move into an advisory role. Daniel looked at her. Are you sure? I'm 60 years old. I've spent my entire life working. I want to spend what's left living. She took his hand. With you, with Sophie, with whatever this is we're building. Family, Daniel said quietly. We're building a family. Yeah, Victoria whispered. We are. She pulled a small box from her pocket and handed it to Daniel. He opened it. Inside was a key. I bought a house, Victoria said. Nothing fancy, 3 bedrooms, a yard for Sophie. Close to the hospital so you can bike to work. Close to her school so she can walk with friends. Victoria, I know we've been taking things slow. I know we agreed not to rush. But Daniel, I'm 60. I don't have time to take things slow anymore, and I don't want to. She squeezed his hand. I want to wake up and make you terrible coffee. I want to help Sophie with homework. I want to fall asleep on the couch during movie night and have you carry me to bed. I want all the ordinary, boring, beautiful moments I've been too busy to have for 30 years. You want me to move in with you. I want you to come home with me. Daniel looked at the key in his hand. Such a small thing. Such a huge thing. Sophie gets a say in this. Of course. And we do this right. Family meetings, boundaries, therapy probably. Whatever we need. And if it gets hard, and it will get hard, we talk about it. No running, no shutting down. No running, Victoria agreed. No shutting down. Daniel closed his hand around the key. Okay. Victoria's face lit up. Okay? Yeah, let's go home. They told Sophie the next morning over pancakes. She listened very seriously as they explained about the new house, about the three of them living together as a family, about what that would mean. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Victoria. Can you be my grandma, for real? Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I would be honored. And Daddy. Sophie turned to Daniel. Does this mean Miss Victoria is going to be like a mom? Daniel looked at Victoria. Victoria looked back. If that's okay with you, Daniel said carefully. Sophie thought about it. Then she smiled, bright and sure. Okay, but she has to read me stories every night. Deal, Victoria said, laughing through tears. Sophie jumped down from her chair and threw her arms around both of them. We're a family now, she announced. A real family. Yeah, Daniel said, pulling them both close. We really are. 1 year later, they stood in the backyard of their house, Victoria's house, their house, watching Sophie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Victoria leaned against Daniel, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. I never thought I'd have this, she said quietly. What? Peace. Home. A second chance at everything I thought I'd missed. Daniel kissed the top of her head. You deserve it. We deserve it. Victoria corrected. All of us. Sophie ran up, breathless and glowing. I caught 3. Did you see? We saw, Victoria said. You're an excellent firefly hunter. The best, Daniel agreed. Sophie grinned, then ran back into the yard. She's happy, Victoria observed. She is. So am I. Daniel turned Victoria to face him. So am I, he said. For the first time in a long time, I'm happy. Good, Victoria whispered. Because I'm not letting you go. Wouldn't dream of it. They kissed, soft and sweet, while fireflies danced around them and Sophie's laughter filled the air, and somewhere in the distance, the city hummed its evening song. They'd both been lost once, both broken, both convinced that the best parts of life were behind them. But they'd been wrong. Sometimes the best parts don't come at the beginning. Sometimes they come in the middle, in the quiet moments of choosing to stay, of choosing to heal, of choosing each other, again and again, until choosing becomes being. And that was family. That was home. That was everything. Daniel's choice to stand up for Victoria when everyone else walked away wasn't just about saving one life. It was about proving that family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by the conscious choice to show up, to care, to fight for someone even when the world tells you to walk away. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the invisible ones. The night nurses who work double shifts and go home to empty apartments and still find the strength to care when caring costs them everything. And sometimes the people who need saving the most are the ones who seem to have it all. The CEOs, the billionaires, the ones who built empires but forgot to build homes. Victoria learned that wealth can't buy what matters. Daniel learned that saving someone doesn't always mean keeping them alive. Sometimes it means teaching them how to live. And Sophie learned that families come in all shapes, that grandmas can arrive late but love just as hard, and that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to stay. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that true responsibility is about choosing to care when no one else will, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Soul Thread Stories. We share stories about people who prove that courage isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet and steady, and shows up at 3 in the morning when no one else is watching. Drop a comment and let us know. Have you ever had someone fight for you when you couldn't fight for yourself? Or have you been that person for someone else? Thank you for being part of our Soul Thread Stories family. Until next time, keep choosing love, keep choosing family, keep choosing each other.